The Mississippi River rolled through St. Louis like a restless giant, its waters glinting under the early morning sun, a ribbon of copper and gray winding past the gateway arch's distant shimmer. Henry Carter, 74, shuffled along the gravel path of Riverside Park, his worn boots crunching softly, his breath a faint puff in the crisp October air. His flannel shirt, patched at the elbows, hung loose on his stooped frame, and a faded baseball cap shaded eyes clouded by years of sorrow. 2 years ago, his daughter, Sarah, had passed, a car accident, sudden and cruel, leaving Henry with him, a grief that clung like the river's damp chill. Each dawn he came here to walk, to trace the river's edge and let its steady flow carry the weight of his loss. The park was a quiet refuge, its cottonwood trees shedding golden leaves that drifted like embers, their branches swaying in the breeze. The air was sharp with the scent of wet grass, mud, and the faint tang of diesel from barges chugging upstream. Henry paused by a weathered bench, his arthritic hands fumbling with a small bundle of wildflowers, daisies and clover gathered from his yard. He knelt, wincing as his knees creaked, and placed the flowers on the ground, a silent offering to Sarah, whose laughter once echoed here during their Sunday picnics. "Miss you, kid," he whispered, his voice rough but tender, the river's murmur a soft reply. A sudden shout cracked the stillness, sharp, commanding, slicing through the dawn. Henry's head jerked up, his heart stuttering as he saw 3 police officers striding across the park, their dark uniforms stark against the autumn gold. A German Shepherd K9, sleek and powerful, strained at its leash, its ears pricked, its amber eyes locked with trained intensity. The lead officer, a young man with a tight jaw, barked orders. "Stop right there! Hands up!" Henry blinked, confusion swirling in his mind. He'd read about tensions in the city, protests over a factory closure, but he was just an old man, a retired mechanic walking by the river. "I ain't doing nothing," Henry stammered, his voice lost in the officer's shouts. He struggled to stand, his hands shaking as he gripped the bench, the wildflowers scattering like confetti. The K9, named Valor by its collar tag, growled low, its hackles rising as the lead officer pointed at Henry. "He's resisting. Release. The dog." The command was a snap, a misjudgment born of adrenaline and error. The leash fell slack and Valor surged forward, his paws pounding the gravel, his teeth bared in a trained attack response. Henry's breath seized, fear flooding his chest as he stumbled back, his cap tumbling to the ground. He'd known dogs, strays, in his old neighborhood, loyal but scrappy. But this was no stray. Valor was a force bred and trained for control, his strength a tool of law. Henry raised his hands, palms out, his eyes wide with terror, Sarah's voice echoing in his mind. "Be kind, Dad, even when it's hard." The river's flow seemed to hush, the cottonwood stilling as if the land held its breath. Valor was nearly upon him, a blur of black and tan, when a sharp yip rang out from the underbrush, a stray mutt pup, scrawny and unseen, its cry cutting through the chaos like a plea. Henry sank to his knees, his heart racing, not knowing that this moment, this clash of fear and instinct, would spark a miracle, a bond of compassion that would stun the officers and ripple through St. Louis, leaving hearts heavy with awe. The Mississippi River churned beyond Riverside Park, its waters a restless murmur under the dawn's pale light, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fallen cottonwood leaves. Henry Carter knelt on the gravel path, his knees aching against the cold ground, his flannel shirt damp with sweat despite the October chill. His baseball cap lay in the dust, wildflowers scattered like broken promises around him. At 74, Henry was no stranger to fear. Grief had carved deep lines in his heart since his daughter Sarah's death 2 years prior. But the sight of Valor, the German Shepherd K9, frozen mid-stride, his amber eyes locked on him, sent a primal terror coursing through his veins. The police officers' shouts echoed across the park, sharp and disjointed, their khaki uniforms blurring in Henry's vision. "Stay down! Don't move!" The lead officer barked, his hand on his holster, mistaking Henry's trembling for defiance. The other 2 officers flanked him, their radios crackling, their faces taut with adrenaline. Valor's leash lay slack on the ground. The command to attack still ringing in the air, but the dog hadn't lunged. The stray mutt pup's yip from the underbrush, high and desperate, had stopped him, his ears twitching, his hackles still raised but his growl softening to a low rumble. Henry's breath hitched, his hands raised, palms out, Sarah's voice whispering in his mind. "Be kind, Dad, even when it's hard." Before he could speak, a new sound cut through the dawn, a guttural snarl, raw and wild, rising from the tangle of willows and tall grasses near the riverbank. Henry's heart lurched as four shapes emerged, their silhouettes jagged against the Mississippi's shimmer. A grizzled mutt led them, his fur matted and gray, one ear torn, his eyes glinting. Like coal, Rusty, Henry named him in his racing thoughts. Two lean strays, Scout and Tess, flanked him, their teeth bared, tails stiff, while a smaller dog, Pip, the pup whose yip had paused Valor, trailed behind, its scrawny frame trembling but defiant. Strays were common in St. Louis, survivors of urban edges, their packs tight-knit and fierce, Coppinger's dogs, 2001. They'd come for Pip, drawn by its cry or the chaos, and now saw Henry as a threat. The park stretched vast and empty, the gateway arch a distant gleam, the city's hum swallowed by the river's drone. Rusty stepped closer, his snarl deepening, his breath a faint cloud in the crisp air, kicking up gravel dust that stung Henry's eyes. Scout and Tess circled, their paws silent but deliberate, their eyes unblinking, forming a tightening ring around him. Pip hovered at the edge, its tail low, its yip replaced by a soft whine. Henry's pulse thundered, his hands shaking as he pressed them to the ground, the gravel biting his palms. He'd seen strays in his old neighborhood, scrappy, loyal, quick to snap at strangers. But this pack was different, their coordination a silent threat, their eyes holding a judgment that felt almost human. "Don't hurt me," Henry whispered, his voice cracking, barely audible over the river's gurgle, and the officer's shouts. The lead officer, misreading the scene, yelled, "Control that dog," meaning Valor, who stood rigid, his gaze flicking between Henry and the pack. The other officers hesitated, their hands hovering near their tasers, unsure whether to intervene. Henry's fear was a living thing clawing at his chest, memories of Sarah flooding in, her gentle hands feeding strays, her voice saying, "They're scared too, Dad. Show 'em you're safe." He wanted to believe it, to trust her wisdom, but the circle of eyes, Rusty's coal-black stare, Scout's and Tess's glinting menace, tightened like a noose. Valor's growl flared again, his training pulling him toward action, but his ears flicked toward Pip, his stance wavering. Henry's mind raced, his grief for Sarah tangling with the present danger. He'd read about K9's in the paper, bred for loyalty, trained to obey, their instincts honed to protect or attack. Valor was no stray, but the pup's cry had stirred something, a crack in his conditioning. The strays, though, were wilder, their pack bonds forged in survival, their territorial instincts sharp. Henry knew a wrong move could provoke them. Teeth could tear, blood could spill. His flannel sleeve caught on the gravel, his breath shallow, the river's chill seeping into his bones. The officers' shouts grew frantic, their voices overlapping. "Back off, call the dog." But the strays didn't flinch, their circling unbroken, Rusty's snarl a low hum that vibrated through the earth. Henry's eyes darted to Pip, the pup, who stepped closer, its whine rising, its scruffy fur bristling. He expected an attack, a snap of jaws, the kind of violence he'd seen in alley fights as a kid. But then, Pip let out another yip, sharp, insistent, not fearful, but commanding. Rusty froze, his ears swiveling toward the pup, his snarl faltering into a huff. Scout and Tess paused, their circling slowing, their gazes shifting from Henry to Pip. Valor's growl softened, his tail twitching, as if caught in the pup's call. Henry's breath caught, his fear mingling with a flicker of awe. Pip's yip had changed something, a signal the pack and even Valor seemed to understand. A spark of recognition that felt like a whisper from the river itself. In St. Louis, folks told stories of strays guarding parks, of dogs that sensed more than humans, could know. Tales rooted in the city's love for its green spaces, its belief in second chances. Henry didn't know if it was true, but as Rusty's eyes met his, softer now, curious rather than hostile, he felt a tremor of hope, a hint of trust that Sarah might have called a miracle waiting to unfold. The Mississippi River exhaled a soft mist over Riverside Park, its waters catching the first rays of dawn, a shimmer of silver and gold threading through the cottonwood trees. Henry Carter knelt on the gravel path, his flannel shirt damp against his back, his arthritic hands pressed to the ground, gravel biting into his palms. At 74, his heart still raced from the terror of moments ago, police shouting, K9 Valor poised to attack, the stray pack snarls circling him like a storm. But the air had shifted. The dawn's light softer now, the river's murmur a gentle pulse that seemed to hush the chaos. The stray pup, Pip, had yipped again, a sharp, insistent sound that had stilled the pack's growls and Valor's trained menace, leaving an uneasy quiet in its wake. The three police officers stood frozen, their khaki uniforms stark against the park's green, their shouts faltering as the scene defied their expectations. The lead officer, his jaw tight, gripped his radio, muttering, "What's the dog doing?" Valor, the German shepherd K9, stood rigid, his amber eyes flicking between Henry and Pip, his hackles lowered, his tail twitching in a way that spoke of confusion, not aggression. The stray pack, Rusty, the grizzled leader, Scout and Tess, the lean flankers, and Pip, the scrawny pup, hovered near the willows. Their circling stopped, their gazes shifting from threat to curiosity. Rusty's coal-black eyes met Henry's, no longer hostile but searching, as if weighing his trembling form against some unspoken measure. Henry's breath came in shallow gasps, his fear ebbing but not gone, his mind clinging to his daughter Sarah's voice. "They're scared too, Dad. Show 'em you're safe." His cap lay in the dust, wildflowers scattered around it, their clover scent mingling with the river's damp chill. He didn't dare move, not with the officers' hands near their tasers, not with Valor's training still a heartbeat away from action. But Pip's yip had changed something, a spark that felt like a whisper from the Mississippi itself, like the stories his neighbors told of strays guarding St. Louis's parks, sensing truths humans missed. Rusty took a step forward, his matted gray fur catching the dawn's glow, his torn ear twitching. Henry tensed, expecting a snarl, but Rusty's jaws parted and a chewed stick, smooth, whittled by teeth, glistening with saliva, dropped at Henry's knees. The gesture was deliberate, not a discard but an offering, a rare act Henry had read, about in a library book on strays, how they sometimes left tokens for those they trusted. Coppinger's Dogs, 2001. Scout and Tess stood still, their tails relaxing, their eyes softer now, while Pip shuffled closer, its whine low and warm. Henry's fingers hovered over the stick, its wood cool and worn, his heart stuttering with awe. "What's happening?" the second officer muttered, his hand dropping from his taser, his voice tinged with disbelief. The lead officer said nothing, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't call Valor back. The K9, against all training, sat, his haunches sinking to the gravel, his gaze fixed on Henry, not as a target but as something else, something safe. Valor's disobedience was a crack in his conditioning, a response to Pip's yip and the pack's shift, a moment that felt less like instinct and more like choice. Henry's breath caught, his eyes darting from the stick to Rusty, then to Valor, then to Pip, whose scruffy fur brushed his hand, a fleeting warmth that steadied him. He reached for the stick, his fingers closing around it, its texture grounding him in the moment. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough, meant for the dogs but carrying to the officers who exchanged glances. The river's mist curled around them, the cottonwoods rustling softly, their leaves drifting like golden snow. Henry's fear melted into something new, a quiet wonder, a sense that these dogs, stray and trained alike, saw him not as a threat, but as a soul in need. Sarah's memory flooded back, her hands feeding strays, her laughter as she named them, her belief that kindness could bridge any divide. "You'd love this kid," he thought, a lump rising in his throat. Rusty tilted his head, his whine soft, almost a reply, and stepped back, his pack following. Scout and Tess's tails flicked, their stances easing, while Pip stayed near, its eyes bright with a trust that felt older than its months. Valor's ears flicked, his body relaxed, his training overridden by the pack's calm and Henry's stillness. The officers, still tense, didn't move, their authority upended by a scene they couldn't explain. Henry held the stick, its weight a promise, a sign that the dogs had chosen peace over violence, a gesture that echoed St. Louis's love for its riverside parks, where strays and people coexisted in fragile harmony. The dawn light grew stronger, painting the river in hues of amber, the air sharp with the scent of mud and leaves. Henry's heart slowed, his awe deepening as he looked at Rusty, at Valor, at Pip, their eyes holding his in a quiet pact. He didn't know it yet, but this offering, this stick, this pause, was the first step toward a bond that would defy reason, a miracle of compassion that would ripple through the park, the city, and his own broken heart, leaving a legacy of trust no one could have foreseen. The Mississippi River sparkled under the rising sun, its waters weaving a golden thread through Riverside Park, where cottonwood leaves drifted like embers in the gentle breeze. Henry Carter sat on the damp grass, his flannel shirt dusted with gravel, his weathered hands clutching the chewed stick Rusty had dropped moments ago, a token of trust that still warmed his palm. At 74, Henry's heart carried the weight of his daughter Sarah's loss, but the terror of the morning, police shouts, K9 Valor's near attack, the stray pack's snarls, had softened into a fragile calm. The river's murmur was a steady hymn, the air rich with the scent of wet mud, clover, and the faint tang of riverweed, grounding him in a moment that felt both ordinary and profound. The three police officers stood at a distance, their khaki uniforms softened by the dawn's light, their voices low and uncertain. The lead officer, his jaw no longer clenched, watched in silence, his radio silent while the others exchanged glances, their hands relaxed but wary. Valor, the German shepherd K9, sat nearby, his sleek black and tan fur catching the sun, his amber eyes no longer fixed on Henry with trained intensity but with a curious glint, his tail twitching in a slow arc. The stray pack, Rusty, the grizzled mutt with a torn ear, Scout and Tess, lean and wiry, and Pip, the scrawny mutt pup, lingered by the river's edge, their earlier menace replaced by a restless energy, their gazes flicking between Henry and the water. Henry's breath steadied, his fear giving way to a quiet wonder as he watched the dogs. The stick in his hand, smooth and worn, felt like a bridge, a gesture that echoed Sarah's belief. Animals know kindness, Dad. They just need a chance to show it. He'd seen her feed strays in this very park, her laughter bright as she named them, names he now gave to these dogs, a small act that felt like claiming them or being claimed. The officer's presence faded into the background, their authority dimmed by the scene unfolding, a scene that defied the chaos of minutes. Rusty let out a low bark, sharp but not threatening, and trotted toward the riverbank, his paws kicking up fine sprays of mud. Scout and Tess followed, their tails wagging, their barks rising in a playful chorus that echoed across the water. They tumbled into the shallows, splashing and nipping, their movements a dance of joy that seemed to invite the world to join. Pip, smaller and hesitant, hovered at the edge, its scruffy fur bristling, its eyes darting to Henry as if seeking permission. Henry's lips curved into a faint smile, his heart lifting at the pup's tentative steps, its paws dipping into the water, a sign of healing from whatever hardships had left it so thin. Valor's ears pricked, his head tilting as he watched the pack play. Against all training, he rose and padded closer to the river, his gait cautious but curious, his tail wagging in a way that spoke of instinct over discipline. He didn't join the splashing but stood at the water's edge, his bark a deep resonant note that mingled with the stray's yips, a sound that felt like belonging. Henry's breath caught, his eyes wide with awe. He'd read about dogs in St. Louis's parks, strays forming packs, K9's bonding with handlers, but this was different, a shared moment that transcended training or survival. a dance that included him, an old man with nothing to offer but his presence. The river shimmered, its surface rippling with reflections of the cottonwoods, their golden leaves swirling in the breeze like confetti. The air was alive with the scent of wet fur, the sharp bite of river water, and the faint sweetness of clover, crushed underfoot. Henry's fingers traced the stick, its texture grounding him as he watched Rusty leap, catching a leaf in his jaws, while Scout and Tess wrestled, their barks bright and free. Pip, braver now, darted between them, its yips, high and gleeful, its small body weaving through the shallows. Valor's tail wagged faster, his bark softer, as if acknowledging the pack's joy, his trained restraint melting into something wilder, something true. Henry's heart swelled, a lump rising in his throat as Sarah's memory flooded back, her hands tossing sticks for strays, her voice naming them with love. "You'd be here, kid," he thought, laughing with them. He wondered if the dog's openness was deliberate, a choice to include him, to trust the man who'd knelt in fear but stayed. In St. Louis, folks told stories of dogs in parks, strays that guarded kids, K9's that saved lives, tales rooted in the city's love for its green spaces, its belief that loyalty ran deeper than training. Henry didn't know if it was true, but as Pip splashed closer, its eyes meeting his with a spark of recognition, he felt it, a connection, a bond that was growing, fragile, but real. The officers shifted, one muttering, "Never seen a K9 do that," his voice tinged with respect. The lead officer nodded, his hand off his radio, his eyes on Valor, who stood like a sentinel, watching the pack but glancing back at Henry, as if checking on him. The stray's play slowed, Rusty shaking, water from his fur, Scout and Tess panting, their tongues lolling. Pip trotted to Henry, its wet paws leaving prints on the gravel, and dropped a small pebble at his feet. A second offering, smaller than Rusty's stick but no less meaningful. Henry reached for it, his fingers trembling, the pebble cool and smooth, a gift that felt like a promise. The sun climbed higher, painting the park in warm hues, the river's murmur a steady heartbeat. Henry held the pebble and stick, his awe deepening as he looked at the dogs, Rusty's steady gaze, Scout's, and Tessa's relaxed stances, Pip's bright eyes, Valor's quiet watchfulness. This dance, this play, was more than instinct. It was an invitation, a step toward a miracle that would soon unfold, a bond of trust that would heal Henry's heart and echo through St. Louis, leaving all who heard it changed. The Cottonwood Grove at Riverside Park glowed in the twilight, its towering trees casting long shadows across the Mississippi's shimmering edge, their leaves trembling like whispers in the cooling breeze. Henry Carter knelt on the mossy earth, his flannel shirt clinging to his shoulders, the chewed stick and pebble, gifts from Rusty and Pip, resting in his trembling hands. At 74, Henry carried the weight of his daughter Sarah's death, like a stone in his chest, but the morning's chaos, police shouts, K9 Valor's near attack, the stray pack's snarls, had given way to a quiet wonder, a fragile trust woven through the dog's play by the river. Now in this grove, the air felt sacred, thick with the scent of damp bark, river mud, and the faint sweetness of clover crushed underfoot. The three police officers stood at the grove's edge, their khaki uniforms dim in the fading light, their voices hushed as if the scene before them demanded reverence. The lead officer, his earlier commands silenced, watched with folded arms while the others shifted, their radios quiet, their eyes wide with something like respect. The dogs had led Henry here, their bark softening as they entered this haven, where the river's churn was a low hymn, the cottonwoods standing like sentinels of St. Louis's heart. Valor, the German shepherd K9, stood on a low rise, his black and tan fur catching the twilight's golden hue, his amber eyes locking onto Henry's, not with trained focus but with a depth that seemed to pierce his soul. Henry's breath hitched, his arthritic fingers tightening around the stick and pebble, their textures grounding him as the grove seemed to still. The stray pack, Rusty, the grizzled mutt with a torn ear, Scout and Tess, lean and watchful, and Pip, the scrawny pup whose yip had sparked this chain of grace, moved in a slow, deliberate circle around him, Their paws brushed the earth, silent but purposeful. Their movements synchronized in a way that felt less like pack instinct and more like a ritual, a dance of recognition that transcended the canine behaviors Henry had read about. Coppingers, Dogs 2001. Rusty led, his coal-black eyes steady, while Scout and Tess followed, their tails low but wagging faintly, their breaths soft clouds in the crisp air. Pip pressed close to Henry, its scruffy fur warm against his knee, its small body trembling with a quiet intensity. The officer's murmurs faded, the river's flow a distant pulse, as Valor stepped forward, his gaze unbroken, his ears tilted as if listening to something beyond sound. Henry's heart pounded, not with fear but with a swelling awe that tightened his throat. Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. "Kindness finds a way, Dad." He'd seen her in this park years ago, tossing sticks for strays, her laughter a melody that drew dogs and people alike. Now Valor's eyes held a spark of that warmth, a gratitude that felt like Sarah's presence. Not a ghost, but a living thread woven into the moment. The K9's training, attack, restrain, obey, seemed to dissolve, replaced by a choice to see Henry, to know him, as if the pup's yip and the pack's trust had unlocked something deeper. Rusty paused, his head tilting, a soft whine escaping, his throat, a sound that seemed to answer Valor's gaze. Scout and Tess slowed, their circling easing into a gentle arc, their eyes glinting with a quiet acknowledgement. Pip's whine rose, high and clear, its small muzzle brushing Henry's, hand a touch so tender it brought tears to his eyes. The grove pulsed with life, the cottonwood's leaves shimmering like gold, their branches framing a scene that felt sacred, like the stories St. Louis folks told of dogs guarding parks, of loyalty that ran deeper than instinct. Henry had never believed those tales, not fully, but now in this twilight he felt their truth, a connection that no science could measure, yet was as real as the earth beneath him. "Sarah," Henry whispered, his voice breaking, the name a release that spilled tears down his weathered cheeks. The grief he'd carried, heavy and unyielding, poured out like the Mississippi's current, mingling with a joy he hadn't known since her loss. Valor's gaze held steady, his head lowering slightly, a soft huff escaping his jaws, as if affirming Henry's pain, his hope, his heart. Rusty stepped closer, his matted fur brushing Henry's arm, a fleeting contact that felt like a vow. Scout and Tess sat, their panting soft, their eyes warm, while Pip curled against Henry's side, its warmth a quiet anchor. The officers watched, one whispering, "That's no training," his voice thick with wonder. The lead officer nodded, his hand resting on his belt, his earlier tension gone, replaced by a stillness that mirrored the grove's calm. The dog's ritual, their circling, their gazes, their touches, was no ordinary behavior, not just the pack bonding or canine curiosity Henry had read about. It was gratitude, a recognition of the trust Henry had shown by staying, by kneeling, by accepting their gifts. The cottonwoods seemed to lean in, their branches a canopy of resilience, a symbol in Midwestern lore of life enduring through storms, just as this moment endured through fear. Henry's tears fell freely, his hands clutching the stick and pebble, their weight a testament to the bond forming here. He looked at Valor, at Rusty, at Scout, Tess, and Pip, their eyes holding his in a shared understanding, a bridge across species that felt like a miracle, not of magic, but of grace, of compassion, that Sarah had always known was possible. The twilight deepened, the river's shimmer fading into dusk, but the grove remained alive, its air charged with a promise that this moment would ripple outward, healing Henry's heart and touching all who heard its story. The Mississippi River roared under a darkening sky, its waters swelling against the banks of Riverside Park, churned by a sudden storm that swept through St. Louis like a restless spirit. Henry Carter stumbled along a narrowing path, his flannel shirt soaked through, his boots slipping in the slick mud that had turned the gravel trail into a quagmire. At 74, his body ached, knees stiff from kneeling, hands cramped around. the stick and pebble gifted by Rusty and Pip, but his heart burned with the memory of the cottonwood grove, where Valor's gaze and the stray pack's ritual had woven a bond that felt like a miracle. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, wet cottonwood bark, and the sharp tang of ozone, the park's quiet haven now a battleground of wind and water. The storm had erupted as twilight faded, clouds rolling in with a ferocity that sent the 3 police officers scrambling for their patrol car, their khaki uniforms vanishing into the deluge. They'd called to Henry, urging him to follow, but the path to the parking lot was flooded, the Mississippi's overflow cutting him off. "Head for the bridge," the lead officer had shouted before the rain drowned his voice, leaving Henry alone. Or so he'd thought. The dogs had stayed. Valor, the German Shepherd K9, his sleek fur plastered to his frame. Rusty, the grizzled, stray leader, Scout and Tess lean and alert, and Pip, the scrawny pup, its scruffy coat matted but eyes bright. They gathered around him, their bark sharp against the storm's howl as if refusing to let him face the danger alone. Henry's breath came in ragged bursts, his baseball cap long lost, rain streaming down his gray hair and stinging his eyes. The path wound deeper into the park toward a rickety footbridge over a swollen creek, a shortcut to the city's edge where he could find shelter. But the floodwaters lapped at the bridge's planks, the path obscured by mud and fallen branches, each step a risk for his frail frame. He clutched the stick and pebble, their textures a quiet anchor, and whispered, "Sarah, show me the way," his voice lost in the wind. His daughter's memory, her laughter in this park, her trust in strays, felt closer now, urging him to trust the dogs as she had. Rusty barked first, a deep, urgent sound that cut through the rain's roar, his coal-black eyes glinting in the storm's flashes. He trotted ahead, pausing to glance back, his torn ear twitching as if signaling a path. Scout and Tess flanked Henry, their bark sharper, their paws steady on the slick ground, guiding him away from the riverbank's deepest ruts, where the floodwater churned with debris. Pip stayed close, darting between his legs, its yips high and insistent, its small body a beacon in the gloom. Valor, his training honed for crisis, moved with purpose, his deep bark a warning when Henry veered toward a submerged root, his shoulder brushing Henry's leg to nudge him back. Henry's heart leaped, his fear of the storm mingling with awe at the dogs' coordination, their insistence on his safety. The path grew narrower, the floodwater rising to Henry's calves, cold and biting, tugging at his boots. A fallen cottonwood branch loomed ahead, its jagged limbs blocking the way, the creek beyond it roaring like a beast. Henry froze, his chest tight, the memory of Sarah's accident, a car skidding in rain, her life stolen, flashing through him, rooting him in place. "I can't," he murmured, his voice swallowed by the storm, but Rusty's bark snapped him back. The stray leader leaped onto the branch, his paws slipping but holding, his eyes fixed on Henry as if saying, "Follow." Scout and Tess circled, their barks a steady chorus, while Pip nipped gently at Henry's heel, urging him forward. Valor pressed close, his fur warm against Henry's hand, a steadying force. Henry's gripped the stick, his fingers tracing its worn grain, and took a shaky breath. Sarah's voice echoed, "Trust, Dad. They know." He stepped onto the branch, his boots slipping, his free hand grasping at the air. But Valor's shoulder steadied him, Rusty's bark guided him forward, and the pack's presence held him close. He climbed over, mud sucking at his feet, and reached the creek's edge, its waters raging below. The bridge was slick, its wooden planks trembling, but the dogs led on. Rusty crossing first, Scout and Tess pacing beside, Pip darting ahead, Valor at Henry's side. Their barks wove a rhythm, a map through the storm, each sound a lifeline pulling him toward safety. The rain stung Henry's face, the wind howling, but the dog's guidance was unwavering. Rusty paused at the bridge's end, his whine soft, almost a welcome, as Henry stumbled onto solid ground, his legs trembling but holding. Scout and Tess shook water from their fur, their barks quieter now, while Pip pressed against Henry's leg, its warmth a quiet triumph. Valor stood tall, his gaze meeting Henry's, a spark of recognition that felt like gratitude, not just for following, but for trusting. The storm raged on, but the path was clear, leading to a park shelter where lights flickered in the distance, a promise of refuge. Henry's tears mingled with the rain, his heart full, the stick and pebble heavy in his hands. He looked at the dogs, Rusty's steady stance, Scout's and Tess's watchful eyes, Pip's eager nudge, Valor's quiet strength, and felt Sarah's presence, her belief in kindness made real. In St. Louis, folks spoke of dogs as guardians, strays, and K9's, alike saving lives in parks like this, tales rooted in the city's love for its riverfront. This was no tale, but a truth, a bond forged in the storm that would carry Henry forward, a miracle of trust that would soon echo beyond the park. The storm had passed, leaving St. Louis cloaked in the quiet of a late October night. The Mississippi River a distant murmur beyond Henry Carter's small apartment window. Henry sat at his kitchen table, his flannel shirt swapped for a worn sweater, his arthritic hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. At 74, his body ached from the day's ordeal. Kneeling in Riverside Park, facing K9 Valor's near attack, the stray pack's snarls, the floodwaters that had nearly claimed him. But his heart carried a new warmth, kindled by the dogs' guidance through the storm, their barks and nudges a lifeline that had led him to safety. The stick and pebble, gifts from Rusty and Pip, rested on the table, their textures smooth under the flicker of a single candle, its glow casting shadows that danced like memories. The apartment was a modest space, its walls lined with faded photos. Sarah, his daughter, smiling at a park picnic. Sarah with a stray dog, her hands gentle. Sarah's high school graduation, her eyes bright with dreams cut short by a rainy night 2 years ago. The air held the scent of old wood, coffee grounds, and the faint must of damp clothes drying by the radiator, a contrast to the park's wild breath of mud and cottonwood. Henry's notebook lay open, its pages filled with shaky handwriting, notes about the dogs, Valor, the K9 with amber eyes, Rusty, the grizzled stray leader, Scout and Tess, lean and loyal, Pip, the scrawny pup whose yip had changed everything. He'd written of their play, their ritual in the cottonwood grove, their guidance through the flood. Each word a question. Was it gratitude? Or am I seeing what I want to see? Henry's fingers traced the stick, its surface worn by Rusty's teeth, and his mind drifted to Sarah's voice. Animals know, Dad. They feel what we feel. He'd dismissed it once, a father's indulgence of a daughter's dreams. But now, after the grove, after the storm, he wasn't sure. Dogs could bond, could protect. Books he'd read at the library spoke of strays forming packs, K9's defying orders under stress, Coppinger's dogs, 2001. But what he'd seen felt bigger, a trust that went beyond instinct, a grace that echoed. Sarah's kindness. He questioned it, though, his mechanic's mind seeking logic. Had he projected his grief, his need for connection, onto their barks, their eyes, their gifts? Or had they truly seen him, an old man with a broken heart, and chosen to guide him? The candle flickered, its light catching the pebble, small and smooth, Pip's offering. Henry closed his eyes, the park's sensory flood returning, the river's churn, the rain sting, Valor's warm fur against his hand, Rusty's steady bark cutting through the storm. He saw the cottonwood grove again, Valor's gaze piercing his soul, the pack circling a ritual that felt like gratitude. It was no ordinary moment, not just dogs reacting to a human's calm. In St. Louis, folks told stories of dogs in parks, strays, saving kids, K9 sniffing out danger, tales rooted in the city's love for its riverfront, its belief in second chances. Henry had scoffed at them once, but now he felt their weight, a truth that lingered like the river's scent on his skin. A soft bark broke the silence, faint but clear, coming from the alley below his window. Henry's eyes snapped open, his heart quickening as he shuffled to the glass, peering into the dark. The alley was shadowed, the street lamp's glow catching glints of movement. Rusty's matted fur, Scout's lean form, Tess's watchful stance, Pip's small shape, darting between them. Valor wasn't there, likely back with his handler, But the strays had followed, their presence no coincidence. They didn't approach, didn't beg, just stood, their eyes glinting up at him, a quiet vigil that felt like a promise. Henry's breath caught, his hand pressing to the window, the glass cool against his palm. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice thick, not expecting an answer, but feeling one in their steady gazes. He returned to the table, his coffee untouched, and picked up his pen, writing, "They stayed. They know me." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of the day, the trust forged in the park. His grief for Sarah hadn't vanished, it never would. But it was softer now, laced with hope, a sense that her kindness lived on in these dogs, in their choice to guide him, to linger. He thought of the officers, their stunned faces as the dogs led him through the flood, their muttered words, "Never seen anything like it." They'd seen it too, a bond that defied explanation, a story that would spread through St. Louis's coffee shops and park benches, as stories did in this city. The candle burned low, its flame a steady pulse, the apartment quiet save for the radiator's hum and the distant echo of the Mississippi. Henry set the pen down, his eyes on the stick and pebble, their presence a testament to the dog's trust. He didn't have answers, not fully. Was it gratitude, instinct, or something more? But he felt Sarah's presence, her belief in connection, in the wild's quiet wisdom. The strays' barks had faded, but their vigil lingered in his heart, a reminder that he wasn't alone, that trust could heal even the deepest wounds, a truth that would decay. The Mississippi River flowed steady and strong through Riverside Park, its waters glinting under a crisp November morning sun, the air sharp, with the scent of frost-kissed grass and damp cottonwood bark. Henry Carter stood at the park's edge, his worn boots crunching on gravel, his sweater layered under a faded jacket, the stick and pebble from Rusty and Pip tucked in his pocket like talismans. At 74, Henry's heart still carried the ache of his daughter Sarah's loss. But the dog's trust, Valor's gaze in the cottonwood grove, the stray pack's guidance through the flood, had kindled a quiet strength, a purpose that drew him back to the park each day. Yet this morning the park's peace was fractured by the growl of machinery, the rumble of bulldozers creeping along its northern boundary, their steel blades glinting like threats. A chain-link fence had sprouted overnight, cordoning off a swath of the park where wildflowers once bloomed, where Sarah had laughed with strays years ago. Signs nailed to the fence read, "Future site of Riverfront Plaza, private development." Their bold letters a stark contrast to the cottonwood's golden leaves. Henry's chest tightened, his breath catching as he saw the strays, Rusty, the grizzled mutt with a torn ear, Scout and Tessie May, lean and alert, and Pip, the scrawny pup, pacing near the fence, their hackles raised, their barks sharp and frantic. Valor, the German shepherd K9 stood with his handler, Officer Daniels, near a patrol car, his amber eyes fixed on the bulldozers, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The dogs sensed danger, not to themselves but to their home, the park that had sheltered their bond with Henry. Henry's fingers brushed the stick in his pocket, his mind racing with memories of Sarah's courage, her protests against factory pollution, her voice steady at community meetings. "We fight for what matters, Dad." Riverside Park was more than a green space. It was St. Louis's heart, a refuge for kids, joggers, and strays, a place where stories of dog loyalty were woven into the city's fabric. But developers had eyed it for years, their plans for condos and shops a threat that had sparked protests, petitions, and now, it seemed, action. Henry had read about park encroachment in the paper, about strays displaced by concrete, their packs scattered, Coppinger's dogs, 2001. The thought of losing this place, of losing the dog's sanctuary, stirred a fire in his chest. A bulldozer lurched forward, its blade scraping the earth, kicking up clouds of dust that stung Henry's eyes and coated his throat. Rusty's bark turned feral, a deep snarl that echoed across the park, and the pack surged toward the machine, their teeth bared, their bodies low and tense. Scout and Tessie May flanked Rusty, their barks a piercing chorus, while Pip darted. Between them, its yips high but fierce, a small warrior in a big fight. Valor broke from Officer Daniels, his leash taut, his growl matching the strays as he joined their line. his training overridden by a shared instinct to protect. The dog's mobbing was raw, territorial, a behavior Henry had read about. Packs, defending their space with coordinated force. But it carried a mythic weight, a defiance that felt like an extension of their bond with him. "Hey, get those dogs back," a construction foreman shouted, his hard hat glinting, his arm waving as workers paused, their faces a mix of fear and frustration. Officer Daniels called to Valor, his voice sharp. "Stand down." But the K9 ignored him, his stance aligned, with Rusty's, his eyes blazing. Henry's heart pounded, fear mingling with resolve as he stepped forward, his boots sinking into the churned earth. The dogs weren't just fighting for territory, they were fighting for the park, for the grove, for the trust they'd built with him. He couldn't let them face this alone, not after they'd guided him through the flood, not after Sarah's memory had urged him to trust. "Stop!" Henry yelled, his voice rough but steady, cutting through the bulldozer's rumble. He raised, his hands palms out, his jacket flapping in the wind, his gray hair damp with sweat. The foreman turned, his eyes narrowing, but Henry held his ground, the stick and pebble in his pocket a quiet strength. "This park's ours. People, dogs, all of us. You can't take it." The workers muttered, some shaking their heads, others glancing at the dogs whose barks grew louder, their circle tightening around the bulldozer's treads. Rusty lunged, snapping at the air, while Scout and Tessie Mae wove between the machine's wheels, their agility a warning. Pip's yips pierced the chaos, its small form darting toward Henry as if urging him to lead. Valor's growl deepened, his body tense, but his eyes flicked to Henry, a spark of recognition that steadied him. Officer Daniels approached, his face torn between duty and awe, his hand on Valor's leash but not pulling. "Carter, get back, those strays could turn," he warned, but his voice lacked conviction, his gaze on the dog's unity. Henry shook his head, his eyes on Rusty, whose snarl softened as he glanced back, his coal-black eyes meeting Henry's a silent question. "Are you with us?" Henry nodded, his fear giving way to a courage he hadn't felt since Sarah's protests, a resolve to fight for the park that had saved him. The bulldozer's engine sputtered, the foreman shouting orders, but the dogs mobbing held firm, their barks a wall of sound that drowned the machine's growl. Dust swirled, the river's mist curling through the air, the cottonwoods standing like witnesses to a battle for their home. Henry's voice rose again, calling to the workers. "You see these dogs? They know this place is worth saving." His words carried Sarah's fire, her belief in fighting for what mattered, and he felt her presence in the dog's defiance, in the park's heartbeat. The strays and Valor weren't just animals. They were allies. Their trust in him a call to action, a bond that would soon rally St. Louis to protect this sacred ground, free him forward into the days ahead. The community center in St. Joseph hummed, with life on a chilly November evening, its fluorescent lights casting a warm glow over folding chairs filled with neighbors, their coats draped over backs, their voices a low murmur like the Mississippi River's flow. Henry Carter stood at the front, his worn sweater slightly askew, his arthritic hands gripping the stick and pebble, gifts from Rusty and Pip that had become his anchors since the events at Riverside Park. At 74, Henry's grief for his daughter Sarah still lingered, but the dog's trust, Valor's gaze, the stray pack's guidance through the flood, their defiance against the bulldozers, had ignited a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Tonight he was here to share their story, to fight for the park that had bound them, his voice trembling but resolute. The room smelled of brewed coffee and fresh donuts, the air tinged with the faint must of old carpet, and the crisp bite of autumn seeping through the windows. Posters on the walls touted park cleanups and dog adoption drives, a testament to St. Joseph's love for its green spaces, its belief in community over concrete. Henry's eyes scanned the crowd. Families, retirees, a few park joggers, even Officer Daniels, Valor's handler, leaning against the back wall, his khaki uniform traded for a flannel shirt. Outside, the strays, Rusty, Scout, Tessie Mae, and Pip, lingered near the center's steps, their shadows visible through the glass doors, their presence a quiet support that steadied Henry's nerves. He cleared his throat, the microphone crackling, and began, his voice rough but clear. "I'm just an old man, but Riverside Park saved me, and so did those dogs." He told of the police mistake, Valor's hesitation, the pack's snarls turning to trust, Rusty's stick, Pip's pebble, their play by the river, their ritual in the cottonwood grove. He spoke of the flood, their barks guiding him to safety, and the bulldozers, their mobbing a cry to save their home. His words carried Sarah's spirit, her activism for the park, her belief in kindness. "Those dogs saw me, really saw me, and they fought for that park. We gotta fight for it too." The crowd leaned in, their murmurs fading, their faces a mix of awe and resolve. A woman in a knit scarf nodded, her eyes wet. A teenager snapped a photo, the flash catching the stick in Henry's hand. Officer Daniel shifted, his expression soft, a far cry from the tense commands of that morning. Henry's heart swelled, his fingers tracing the pebble's smooth curve, Sarah's voice echoing, "Speak up, Dad. They'll listen." He doubted it, his mechanic's mind skeptical of stories changing minds, but the dog's actions, documented in studies as rare trust gestures, Coppinger's Dogs, 2001, were no ordinary tale. They were proof, a bond that had turned a park into sacred ground. Dr. Ellis, a local veterinarian with graying hair and a clipboard, stood next, her voice calm but firm. "Henry's story checks out," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Strays and K9's can form bonds with humans, especially in crisis. What he described, gift-giving, coordinated guidance, territorial defense, is rare but real. Those dogs chose him." She cited cases, strays guarding parks, K9's defying orders for trust. The crowd murmured, a retiree whispering, "Like the old park legends." Dr. Ellis nodded, adding, "Riverside's their home too. If we lose it, we lose them." Her words landed like a call, tying Henry's story to St. Joseph's heart, its reverence for dogs as guardians, its fight to keep the park free from developers' blades. The room erupted in questions, hands raised, voices overlapping. A young mother asked about the stray's safety. A park ranger offered to organize patrols. Henry answered as best he could, his voice steadier now, the stick and pebble grounding him. "They're still out there," he said, glancing at the doors where Rusty's silhouette stood, Pip's small form beside him. The crowd turned, some gasping, others smiling, the dog's presence a living testament to Henry's words. Officer Daniel spoke up, his tone quiet. "Valor's never been the same since. He's calmer, like he learned something from those strays." The admission drew nods, the community seeing not just Henry's story but their own. Park picnics, dog walks, moments of connection threatened by concrete. A vote was called, the crowd's hands rising to protect Riverside Park, to petition the city against the riverfront plaza. Henry's chest loosened, his tears pricking as he saw Sarah's, courage in their faces, her belief in fighting for what mattered. The strays outside barked softly, Rusty's deep note mingling with Pip's yip, a chorus that felt like approval, like gratitude. In St. Joseph, stories of dogs were currency, tales of loyalty told over coffee, of strays saving kids, of K9's sniffing out hope. Henry's story was one more, but it was theirs too, a call to save the park that had birthed a miracle, a bond that would soon spark another moment of grace. The Mississippi River shimmered under the first light of dawn, its waters weaving a silver thread through Riverside Park, where cottonwood trees stood sentinel, their golden leaves drifting like whispers of autumn. Henry Carter stood on the park's gravel path, his worn boots dusted with frost, his sweater warmed by a patched jacket, the stick and pebble from Rusty and Pip nestled in his pocket. At 74, Henry's grief for his daughter Sarah still lingered, a quiet ache softened by the dog's trust, Valor's gaze in the cottonwood grove, the stray pack's guidance through the flood, their defiance against the bulldozers, and the community's vow to save the park. This morning the air was crisp with the scent of damp earth, riverweed, and the faint sweetness of clover. The park a sanctuary reborn after the community's stand. The chain-link fence was gone, the bulldozers silenced, their threat replaced by new signs. Riverside Park, protected community land. Henry's story, shared at the community center, had sparked petitions, protests, and a city council vote, preserving the park for St. Joseph's people and dogs. He'd seen it in the papers, heard it in coffee shop murmurs. His tale of valor. Rusty, Scout, Tessie Mae, and Pip had become a local legend, a testament to trust across species. Yet Henry felt no pride, only gratitude, his heart full as he walked the path where it began, the river's murmur a steady hymn, the cottonwoods a canopy of resilience, symbols in Midwestern lore of life enduring through storms. The strays were, near their presence, a quiet pulse, Rusty's matted fur catching the dawn's glow, Scout and Tessie Mae pacing the riverbank, Pip darting through the grass, its scruffy coat cleaner now, its eyes bright with youth. Valor wasn't here, likely at the police station with Officer Daniels, but his spirit lingered in the pack's unity, in the bond they'd forged with Henry. He paused by a low bench, the same one where he'd scattered wildflowers for Sarah, his hands trembling as he drew the stick and pebble from his pocket, their textures worn and warm, anchors of a journey that had healed him. Sarah's voice echoed, "Kindness finds a way, Dad." Her memory vivid in the park she'd loved, where she'd fed strays and dreamed of a better world. A soft yip broke his thoughts, high and clear, drawing his eyes to Pip. The pup trotted toward him, its small paws leaving prints in the frost, its tail wagging like a metronome. In its jaws it carried a feather, small, white, edged with gray, a sparrow's gift caught in the grass. Pip stopped at Henry's feet, its eyes meeting his, and gently dropped the feather, a deliberate act that mirrored Rusty's stick and Pip's pebble, a gesture of trust rare in strays but real. Coppinger's Dogs, 2001. Henry's breath caught, his heart stuttering as he knelt, his knees creaking, his fingers brushing the feather's softness, its delicate barbs catching the dawn's light like a prism. The feather was no ordinary token. Sarah had kept one like it, found in this park, tucked in her journal with a note. "Hope flies, Dad." Henry's eyes stung, tears welling as he lifted the feather, its weightless grace a mirror to the one he'd lost when Sarah's journal was damaged in a move. He looked at Pip, whose whine was soft, almost a song, its eyes bright with a knowing that felt beyond its months. Rusty approached, his torn ear twitching, his coal-black gaze steady, while Scout and Tessie Mae sat nearby, their panting a quiet rhythm, their presence a circle of support. The pack's stillness was no mere instinct, but a recognition, a sealing, of the bond that had grown through fear, trust, and fight. Henry's voice cracked as he whispered Sarah. The name was a prayer, a release that mingled grief with joy, his tears falling freely onto the frost-kissed grass. The feather was her keepsake reborn, a sign that her spirit lived in the dogs, in the park, in the trust they'd given him. He thought of the cottonwood grove, Valor's gaze piercing his soul, the pack's ritual a first miracle. This was another, not of magic but of connection, a moment that transcended the canine behaviors he'd read about. Strays offering items, packs bonding with humans in crisis. In St. Joseph, feathers were tokens of hope, carried in pockets, pinned to boards, a nod to the city's belief that small things held big truths. The dawn light grew, painting the river in hues of amber, the cottonwood's leaves swirling like golden snow. Henry held the feather, stick, and pebble, their weight a testament to the dog's trust, a bond sealed in this quiet act. Pip pressed close, its fur warm against his hand, its whine a gentle nudge. Rusty's huff was deep, Scout's, and Tessie Mae's eyes warm, their pack a family that had claimed Henry as their own. He felt Sarah's presence, not a ghost but a warmth woven into the feather's softness, the park's heartbeat, the dog's gaze. The community's fight had saved the park, but this moment saved him, a closure that embraced the mystery of trust, a spark that would carry him into the farewell to come. The strays stirred, Rusty leading them toward the river, their barks soft but purposeful, as if sensing the next step. Henry stood, the feather tucked carefully in his pocket, his heart lighter, his resolve firm. St. Joseph's stories of dogs, guardians of parks, allies in crisis, were his now, a legacy he'd carry forward, a truth that would soon echo beyond the riverbank, binding him to the pack and the city in a final, gentle farewell. The Mississippi River sighed under a pale November dawn, its waters a quiet mirror reflecting the cottonwood trees of Riverside Park, their bare branches etched against a sky streaked with pink and gold. Henry Carter walked the gravel path, his worn boots crunching softly, his jacket zipped against the morning's chill, the stick, pebble, and feather, gifts from Rusty, Pip, and the park itself, safe in his pocket. At 74, Henry's grief for his daughter Sarah was a familiar shadow, but the dog's trust, Valor's gaze, the stray pack's guidance, Pip's feather, had woven a light through it, a healing that had saved the park and mended his heart. Today he felt a pull, a sense that the dogs were leading him to a final moment, a farewell that would seal their bond. The park was alive with the scent of frost, damp earth, and the faint musk of fallen leaves, its paths bustling with joggers and dog walkers, a testament to St. Joseph's victory over the developers. Riverside Park was safe, its wildflowers and cottonwoods protected, thanks to Henry's story, now a local legend shared in coffee shops and church basements. He'd seen the strays, Rusty, Scout, Tessie Mae, and Pip, each day since, their presence a quiet comfort. But this morning, they were different, their bark sharper, their movements purposeful, as if guiding him toward the park's western edge, where the city's hum met the river's peace. Henry's breath puffed in the crisp air, his arthritic hands steady as he walked, Sarah's voice a soft echo. They know, Dad. They always know. He spotted the pack ahead, their silhouettes weaving through the grasses, Rusty's matted fur, Scout's lean grace, Tessie Mae's watchful stance, Pip's scampering joy. Valor was there too, his black and tan coat gleaming, his leash held, loosely by Officer Daniels, who'd brought him to the park on his day off, a nod to the bond they'd all shared. The K9's amber eyes met Henry's, a spark of recognition that warmed him, a reminder of the grove, the flood, the fight for the park. Rusty barked, a deep, resonant call, and trotted ahead, pausing to glance back, his torn ear twitching as if pointing the way. Scout and Tessie Mae flanked Henry, their barks softer, their paws steady on the frosty path, guiding him past the bench where he'd scattered wildflowers for Sarah, past the cottonwood grove where trust was born. Pip darted between them, its yips bright, its scruffy fur brushing Henry's leg, a fleeting warmth that felt like a promise. Valor kept pace, his stride measured, his deep huff a steady rhythm, his training softened by the pack's wild spirit. Henry's heart lifted, his steps surer. The dog's escort a ritual of loyalty, a behavior he'd read about, packs accompanying trusted humans, strays and K9's alike forming bonds that endured. Coppinger's Dogs, 2001. The path curved toward the park's edge where a wooden sign read, Riverside Park, Community Preserved, its letters carved deep, a mark of St. Joseph's resolve. Beyond it the city loomed, streetlights fading, cars humming, the world Henry would return to. The dogs slowed, their barks quieting, their eyes fixed on him. Rusty stepped forward, his jaws parting, and a small bone, smooth, polished by time, likely scavenged from the riverbank, dropped at Henry's feet. The gesture was deliberate, a final gift like the stick, pebble, and feather, a seal of trust that felt mythic, a moment that echoed St. Joseph's tales of dogs as guardians, their loyalty a bridge between wild and human. Henry knelt, his knees creaking, his fingers brushing the bone's cool surface, his eyes stinging with tears. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick, meant for Rusty but carrying to the pack, to Valor, to the park itself. Pip's whine was soft, its muzzle nudging his hand, while Scout and Tessie Mae sat, their panting a gentle rhythm, their eyes warm with farewell. Valor's huff was deep, his head lowering, his gaze steady, a K9 no longer bound by commands but by connection. Officer Daniels watched, his face soft, his voice low. "They're saying goodbye, Carter." Henry nodded, his heart full, Sarah's memory vivid, her laughter with strays, her belief in kindness now alive in this moment. The breeze stirred, carrying the river's scent, the cottonwoods rustle, the fading echo of the dog's barks. Henry stood, the bone joining the stick, pebble, and feather in his pocket, their weight a quiet vow to carry their trust. The pack began to move, Rusty leading them back toward the river, Scout and Tessie Mae following, Pip lingering a moment. Longer, it's yip a final note of joy. Valor turned, his leash slack, his eyes holding Henry's one last time before trotting after Officer Daniels, who raised a hand in silent respect. The dog's silhouettes faded into the dawn, their barks softening, a farewell that was not an and but a release, a blessing to carry forward. Henry's tears fell, his grief for Sarah softer now, woven with gratitude for the dogs, for the park, for St. Joseph's fight. The city's hum grew louder, but the river's song lingered, a reminder of the bond that had healed him. In St. Joseph, dogs were more than pets, guardians of parks, keepers of hope, their stories told over coffee etched in community hearts. Henry's story was theirs, a farewell that would lead to a legacy, a truth of trust that would echo beyond the park, guiding him into the days ahead. The St. Joseph Community Center buzzed on a crisp December evening, its walls warmed by the glow of string lights, the air rich with the scent of hot cider and fresh pine from a small Christmas tree in the corner. Henry Carter stood at a wooden podium, his worn sweater neat, his arthritic hands steady as he held the stick, pebble, feather, and bone, gifts from Rusty, Pip, and the Riverside Park dogs that had changed his life. At 74, Henry's grief for his daughter Sarah was a quiet companion, softened by the trust of Valor, Rusty, Scout, Tessie Mae, and Pip, whose story had saved the park and mended his heart. Tonight he shared that story with a room of neighbors, kids, and park volunteers, his voice rough but clear, a legacy woven from compassion. The center was a heartbeat of St. Joseph, its tables cluttered with coffee mugs, park cleanup flyers, and dog adoption pamphlets, a reflection of the city's love for its green spaces and its four-legged guardians. Outside, the Mississippi River's murmur was faint, its presence a distant echo of the park where Henry's journey began. Mistaken for a protester, nearly attacked by K9 Valor, saved by Pip's yip, guided by the pack through a flood, united in a fight against bulldozers. The room was packed, faces lit with curiosity, a young girl with a sketchbook, a retiree nodding, Officer Daniels in the back, his K9 Valor absent but his presence felt in Henry's words. Henry spoke of the dog's trust, Rusty's stick, Pip's pebble, their playful dance, Valor's gaze in the cottonwood grove, their guidance through the storm, their defiance against developers, Pip's feather, their farewell at the park's edge. "They saw me," he said, his voice thick. "Not as an old man, but as someone worth saving. They taught me compassion's a language we all speak, human or dog." He held up the feather, its white-gray barbs catching the light, a keepsake, like Sarah's, a symbol of hope in St. Joseph's lore. Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. "Kindness finds a way, Dad." Her activism for the park alive in this moment, her legacy carried in his words. The crowd leaned in, their murmurs soft, their eyes bright with recognition. A boy asked, "Do the dogs still come?" Henry smiled, his fingers brushing the bone from Rusty's farewell. "They're out there," he said, watching the park. He'd seen them, Rusty's silhouette by the river, Scout and Tessie Mae's tracks, Pip's scamper in the grass, though their visits were rarer now, their pack strong but wild, their bond with him enduring like the river's flow. Studies he'd read confirmed it. Strays could maintain ties with trusted humans, their presence a quiet vigil, Coppinger's dogs, 2001. Valor, back on duty, had changed too, Officer Daniels had said, calmer, as if the pack's trust had reshaped him. A woman stood, her scarf bright, her voice firm. "You saved the park, Henry, you and those dogs." The room clapped, hands rising, a warmth that felt like Sarah's embrace. Henry shook his head, humble. "They saved me," he said, "and we all saved the park." Riverside Park was thriving. New trails, a dog run, a plaque by the oak grove honoring community spirit, a nod to the dogs. St. Joseph's stories of dogs, guardians, allies had grown. Henry's tale now part of the city's fabric, told over coffee, etched in kids' drawings of strays and K9's under cottonwoods. As he finished, a soft bark drifted through the open window, high and sharp, unmistakably Pip's. Henry's heart leaped, his eyes darting to the glass, where the park's shadows held no form, just the glint of stars over the Mississippi. The crowd hushed, some smiling, others whispering, "It's them." Henry didn't need to see Pip to know it was there. The pack's echo, a final gift, a reminder that their bond was unbroken, a whisper of trust that lingered like the river's song. He clutched the feather, its softness a tether to Sarah, to the dogs, to the park that had healed him. The meeting ended, neighbors lingering, sharing stories of their own dogs, their own parks. Henry stepped outside, the night air sharp with pine and frost, the city's hum a contrast to the river's memory, its churn in the flood, its shimmer at dawn. He walked home, the stick, pebble, feather, and bone in his pocket, their weight a quiet vow to carry the dog's lesson. Compassion heals, trust binds across species, across time. Sarah's legacy was his now, her kindness alive in his teaching, in the park's preservation, in St. Joseph's heart. In his apartment, Henry set the gifts on a shelf, beside Sarah's photo, her smile bright. He opened his notebook, writing, "They taught me to trust, to fight, to love. I'll tell their story always." A distant bark, Pip's or another stray's, floated through the window, an echo of compassion that would never fade. St. Joseph's, dogs were its soul, their loyalty a legacy that would guide the city forward just as they'd guided Henry. A humble man made whole by a bond that no one, not even he, had expected.